It is great to be joined today by Drew Penrose, who heads the Law and Policy Department at FairVote. He contributes to work around ranked choice voting, primary elections, election administration, and the Voting Rights Act. Drew, great to talk to you today.
Great to be on.
So let's start talking a little bit about ranked choice voting. This is something that's of significant interest to my audience. First, for people who have not yet been introduced to this concept, talk a little bit about generally how ranked choice voting works, and then we can dig into some of the specific versions of it.
Absolutely. So ranked choice voting is simple. You're allowed to vote for your first choice just like you do now. But in addition to that, you can rank backup choices in order of preference. So if I can't get my first choice, here's my second choice, here's my third choice, and so on, as many as you want to rank until you have no opinion anymore. If a candidate's able to get a majority just of those first choices, they'll win just like any other election. But if no candidate has more than half of the votes in that first round, you eliminate the candidate in the last place. And if your favorite candidate is eliminated, then your vote instantly counts for your second choice, your backup candidate. And you just repeat that process until a candidate is able to win with a majority of the vote. So that way more people are able to participate. There's no talk about spoilers or split votes or plurality outcomes. You get strong winners, more positive campaigns, really a pretty big impact for what is at its heart a pretty simple, small change.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the reasons so the advantages to such a system. You talked about the spoiler effect would be eliminated because people can say, well, if I align more with someone who's outside of the Democratic or Republican Party, they might be my primary choice, but I don't have to worry that I'm going to be effectively helping the candidate I most disagree with to win by virtue of supporting this other candidate. What are some of the other advantages to such a system?
So it allows more candidates to participate. Not only, so you emphasized there when you talked about the spoiler issue, the ability of voters to vote honestly. And that is, for voters, the probably the clearest benefit that you have. If you have independent candidates and candidates from the two major parties, you don't need to think, well, do these independents really have a chance? You can just honestly rank the candidates in order of choice. There's a corollary benefit, which is from sort of the candidate or public side, that more candidates are able to participate without being called spoilers. So if you have a positive vision for your community and you want to run for office, the thing you don't need to worry about anymore is whether you're going to take votes away from somebody that you'd like to see win if you can't. That just goes out the window. So as a result, you have more inclusive campaigns already by virtue of having more candidates able to run.
So
now,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, when they're out campaigning, that changes things as well, because when you're campaigning, you not only want to earn as many first choices as you can, but you want to make sure that if you run into a voter who favors one of your opponents, that they're going to rank you second. So you don't ignore anybody. Your incentives are to reach out positively to as many voters as you can. It really helps to ensure that the ultimate winner is likely to be somebody that has talked to a lot more voters than they would under the current system.
Let's talk about some of the criticisms that exist of at least some iterations of what we're talking about. One is the possibility that the eventual winner may not actually have been anybody's first choice. And that is inherently problematic, some would argue, because you ultimately have somebody who has been elected despite not having been the sort of ideal candidate for any of the voters, and that brings with it problems. Which versions are susceptible to that? How can you tweak the system to prevent that from being a possibility?
Yeah, so the system that we just call ranked choice voting, the one that I described earlier, that's not a mathematical possibility. You look at the first choices initially, and if nobody has a majority of the first choices, then you're going to eliminate the candidates with the fewest first choices. So if a candidate isn't able to attract that kind of core support, they'll be eliminated early in the count. So there's no way that a candidate can win without achieving that substantial level of first choices. And historically, we have seen there have now been hundreds of ranked choice voting elections at the local level across the California Bay Area, and here in Maryland, and other cities, Minnesota. And what we see is that the candidate who leads in first choices usually goes on to win. I mean, if they're able to attract majority support, they're probably doing pretty well in first choices as well. Sometimes the candidate in second in first choices goes on to win after some sort of vote split is resolved. And in exactly one election out of the hundreds that have taken place, a candidate in third has won. That's it. No candidate in fourth or later has ever gone on to win an election under that method. The methods that do make that possible are more esoteric, sort of more theoretical systems. So, for example, the class of voting methods that are called Condorcet methods, where you actually compare who is this candidate beating? Who are they ranked higher than? And if there's a candidate that is ranked higher than every other candidate under every possible iteration, then that candidate always wins. It's used in some university elections, but it's not used in any public elections anywhere in the world. That system does make it possible for a candidate to win by essentially being every voter's second choice. Probably one of the reasons that it's been difficult to get it adopted. But the instant runoff form that I described does not have that problem at all.
Okay, good. We're going through these one by one, and I'm liking this. So here, another common argument is that in some way there's a violation of one person, one vote when you have a ranked choice system. This is a very common one that I hear when I talk about it. And the idea being you're sort of voting for more than one person in this ranked way. But my counter argument has been, in the end, in the final tally, you're only getting one vote. Is that the right way to address that criticism?
That's exactly right. There are other ways of putting it, but it sounds like you understand pretty clearly what's going on here. So you always only have one vote. Each round of counting, your vote counts for exactly one candidate. It's never the case that your vote is helping both your first choice and your second choice at the same time. Your vote only ever counts for one candidate at a time. You don't get any benefit from your candidate being eliminated and it going to your second choice. Nobody wants their favorite candidate to be eliminated, and it's not as if you're getting two votes, whereas other people only got one vote. People generally would prefer that their vote count for their first choice in every round of counting and that their first choice not be eliminated. This has been assessed by courts, and courts have come out the right way every single time. So there have been lawsuits in state courts in Massachusetts and in Minnesota that both came out, and Michigan, all agreeing with that principle. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, coming out of a case in San Francisco, also reached the same conclusion. Following his apparent loss under ranked choice voting, Bruce Poliquin, the incumbent in Congressional District 2 in Maine, filed a lawsuit making this argument. And although it hasn't been judged on the merits yet, an early decision of the court indicates that the judge is going to come out the same way. I'm really not worried about it.
At the presidential level, at the federal level, could any version of these ranked choice voting systems be put in place without an amendment to the Constitution?
So you couldn't do a national level ranked choice voting election for president without either an amendment to the Constitution or some kind of agreement among all of the states to share ranked choice voting data. Those are the only two possible ways that that could occur. States could do it for their own elections. So it is already the case that people have more than two candidates in the presidential election in their own states. And states don't really like the idea of all of their electors going to a candidate who only won, 47 or 48% of the vote when there were libertarians or Greens or other third party or independent candidates in the race. So a state could do it for their own electors right now.
It seems that if you had the successful implementation of the interstate popular vote compact nationally, where you get enough states to say, we will award our electors to the candidate winning the popular vote nationally, and you could potentially integrate into that at the state level a ranked choice voting system, that you could actually drastically overhaul the way that we select the president without needing to do a thing at the federal level. I mean, it's an uphill battle, but am I correctly understanding that?
No, that's true. What you would want to do, so the National Popular Vote Compact is an agreement among states to use the national popular vote to decide who to award their electors to.
Yes.
So they need a report of the votes from every single state in order to do that. So in order for that to be a ranked choice voting election, you would need essentially every state to be conducting ranked choice voting so that they would have the same sort of vote total to report. However, the two are not incompatible. So that is to say, you could have some states using ranked choice voting and still have the national popular vote go into effect. You would just, the states that are using ranked choice voting would report the final round for the national vote total, essentially. Now, you could combine that with an agreement among the states to use ranked choice voting and to pool their ranked choice voting counts together, and you could get closer and closer to a national ranked choice voting election. It would start to approximate one until you eventually got to the point where all 50 states had adopted it, and then you would have that without, just like you said, without a single action needing to be taken by the Congress.
Briefly, Drew, I wanted to touch on one other thing, which is not related specifically to ranked choice, but we see with every election that the focus on voter suppression and intimidation becomes greater and greater as we get closer to Election Day, at which point it's often too late to really stop some of the things that are going on. So given that we just had the midterms very, very recently, what can people be doing right now already to try to prevent these tactics from succeeding for the 2020 election, which I know sounds like it's so far away, but we have to start thinking about this now. What can individual voters do?
There are a lot of good groups out there that are running legislative campaigns or initiative campaigns or filing lawsuits to try to stop those efforts from taking place. And I see it as really bipartisan. I mean, at the elite level, it looks like there are efforts from partisans to try to game the system. But when you see it go to the voters, for example, in Florida, the measure to extend voting rights to more people after they had completed their prison sentences passed by a 2-to-1 margin in a state that's pretty closely divided in partisanship. So it's really a nonpartisan idea, and people should be out there promoting that. In addition, the national sort of sentiment being in favor of a greater right to vote goes hand in hand with our notion that the right to vote should absolutely be more than just putting a piece of paper into a box. It should convey real political power. And that's really what reforms like ranked choice voting are about. So I don't see them really as separate categories of work at all. They absolutely are very closely connected.
Drew Penrose heads the Law and Policy Department at FairVote. Drew, really great talking to you today. I appreciate your time.
Glad to be on. Thank you very much.